This is indeed another trash day, but this is going to be a different kind of trash day. Aha, how so? Well, since the entire cast of government and the media and characters like this are all nothing but bit players choreographed in a theater act of facades, I need my set to be in keeping with the level of refinement of my antagonists. I have a passion for words and the power they can hold, and that's why I don't like a charlatan wordsmith that places the same emphasis as I do on the concept of words as a tool when he himself is a tool. I wouldn't be nearly as annoyed by tools like you, and certainly wouldn't be making a video about you, if our country and Western civilization wasn't sitting in the shadow of a serious crisis right now. For there's never really been a time in history when there's been a greater need for words to be anchored to reality and language to be treated as the tool it truly is. But hocus pocus, I'm seeing more and more wizards coming out of the woodwork all the time that are only making things worse. People waving around books they know nothing about and talking about things they know nothing about. And I'm really fucking tired of seeing role players the likes of you masquerading as exquisitely cultured and philosophically enriched scholars that hold the keys to the solutions of the problems we face today. Well, you don't, Slick. In fact, you treat language as costume jewelry, not the refined, razor-edged weapon you so flamboyantly fancy yourself as being the beholder of. The Caped Avenger swooping in with his sharply honed pen.
His pen is sharp, like the talons on a stealthy falcon, silently riding the thermal drifts, with keen vision tracking his prey.
Ah yes, linguistic gladiator by day, playboy by night. So well read and spoken. Gladiators like you also like to think you're even more formidable by impressing everyone by speaking in different languages. Whoopee-doo. That just means you can say,
"Everyone's entitled to their own opinion,"
in several different languages. Congratulations, what a milestone. And I duly raise that point because the trusty old
"Everyone's entitled to their own opinion"
is always the emergency passage that reveals itself from behind the wall of books when in a serious debate with imposters like you. I'd much rather know what I'm talking about in one language and have a concise and confident standpoint than be a whimsical charlatan that babbles away in 10 fucking languages. I don't have any patience for showboats like you because we're facing some really serious problems that are not going to be resolved with stylishly ass-kissing popularity contests and opinions. So I may as well do some trash removal on the whole "everyone's entitled to their own opinion" mantra while its smell is still in the air. Call it a preemptive strike on any bright ideas of trying to use it as an argument henceforth.
"Everyone's entitled to their own opinion"
is decidedly inadequate when it comes to serious issues, and is really only applicable to subjective issues, like for instance your favorite color. But the problem, and it's a big one, is that the slogan is most widely used as a means to avoid arriving at any answers. And I have a problem with that, and if you think about it, if one actually has a standpoint that defends one's case, then one wouldn't be so anxious to abandon their standpoint and navigate off into the vacuum of space. One must not be taking one's own statement too seriously if one is so quick to relinquish it. With this, of course, routinely leading to silly resolutions of common cooperation and compromise that stand as some kind of gregarious treaty that you'll all cordially agree to disagree. It's such nonsense. Nonsense that only deepens the waters of the philosophical quagmire because the translation of all that nonsense is nothing other than, there's no such thing as truth. Not surprisingly, some enthusiasts don't even bother trying to camouflage their cerebral laziness and just come right out and proclaim,
"There's no such thing as truth."
No beating around the bush, let's just get straight to the coma. But when you inquire as to how they know their own statement is true, if nothing is true, and it must be self-inclusive, they suddenly exempt their wisdom from their own criterion. Indeed, they're the clairvoyant bearer of the revelation. But I'd still like to know how you pioneer such a profound conclusion when reason is forbidden and nothing is true apart from the statement that there's no such thing as truth. It's so wacky that people even seriously participate in such circulatory nonsense as an argument, yet they do. And they do because it's all just secondhand nonsense that gets passed on over time because the best way to relinquish oneself from any responsibility of finding answers is to say there are none, and then just get everyone to agree on that and the pact is sealed in stone. Trade secrets of the ignorant, sort of like an oath of duty in putting a governor on your own brain. That's what the tricksters have been doing generation after generation. The intellectual swindlers are actually the easiest to spot because they're the first ones trying to tell you there are no answers. The same way the religious swindlers like to ensure you,
"It's not for you to know, my child, but we'll show you the way."
But the subject matters on deck and the issues at stake don't concern your favorite color, or whether or not you think soccer is for vulgar juveniles. Oh, and by the way, I think acting should involve using all parts of your body, including your brain. So let's discuss that for a minute, shall we? Within your own comments on your silly old school video, you exposed yourself as an even bigger fraud than I already knew you to be. I'll get to that point explicitly in due course. Wouldn't want to get too hasty with all the theatrics now, would we? Kind of like how you like to pause mid-sentence and let it hang before you compose the rest of the sentence. Not because you don't know what to say, but because that's when all the ladies are supposed to dangle in drooling suspense with tingling anticipation and wonder as to what the next juxtaposition will be that poetically flows from the gifted mouth of the literary master journeyman. Similar to the little games this guy plays. I'll have to deal with him another time, and this guy, because both of them are just as annoying and meddlesome as you are. And I'm quite aware this video will cost me some more subs, but I don't give a shit because I didn't start this channel to try and be popular. It can't be said enough that this country is facing some serious troubling times that aren't to be taken lightly. The cultural atmosphere of any given society is dictated by its intellectual atmosphere, or lack thereof, with that condition dictated by the influential leaders. And when I say influential leaders, I mean that in a broad sense, not just restricted to the political variety. In fact, the word influential carries a whole new kind of weight these days because it's largely the entertainment world that has set the intellectual bar, and it hasn't been good, and it keeps getting lower. Even in the case of Trudeau as a political leader, his influence on the masses is largely because he's deemed a heartthrob calendar boy. The influential leaders and speakers are like the barometer of the culture itself. You can see things are getting worse and worse and worse and worse, but parasites like this and this and this and this think it's getting worse because they think we're still not trying hard enough at doing what they think we need to be doing, when in fact it's what they're doing that's causing all the damage and continually making it worse. This became agonizingly clear in the final Ontario election debate. You saw them all desperately trying to convince you that it's their social system that's going to work this time, their plan. You see them readily admitting that things are falling apart, but still think if we just keep trying harder at doing what they say we should do, then it will eventually work. Such is the fate of the socialist view. And Doug Ford can pretend all he wants that he champions small government, but it's all a racket because they're all soliciting the same gimmick, that it's for the good of the people. Like this banana head here, he thinks housing is a human right. Housing is not a human right. You have the right to pursue housing and shelter, but you don't have an arbitrary right to have a roof over your head. The Founding Fathers would have laughed a sideshow like this right out of the room because they were so meticulous and objective when it came to crafting and drafting the American Constitution, with simple words like pursuit holding monumental weight, because it's the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit to happiness. It's not the right to happiness. They didn't put the word pursuit in there by mistake. Life and liberty are inalienable rights, but happiness and material needs are not. So you have every right to pursue your housing, but not a right to housing. Whenever you claim a right of such nature, you are claiming a right to the work and efforts of others. Ayn Rand used to beautifully encapsulate people like this by eloquently saying, "Whoever is saying that it's for the good of the state is or wants to be the state." I wasn't going to mention the name Ayn Rand just yet in my videos. I was building an undercarriage before I dropped her name. But I'm noticing more and more charlatans like this popping up that do little but fertilize a land of confusion. And many are just using all the chaos as a masthead so they can broadcast the goop that comes out of their mouth as an instrument to be popular and cash in. And I also noticed something in particular that I just can't leave unattended, which unites me back to what you unknowingly revealed in the comments section of your video about old school. I read a remark you wrote in response to one of your viewers, who will also feel my wrath, where you basically branded the Ayn Rand novel, Atlas Shrugged, as just another read to get around to amongst a pile of other generic tomes. And I see you decided to use the word tomes in hopes that perhaps readers would search its meaning and learn that it means a big, thick book, usually of scholarly brilliance. It's hilarious, you know. I love finding unique words to use too. I just love words, but I love them to put ballast, steerage, and gun ports on a dispatch, not to smother things in salt and pepper because it's amateur hour in the galley. But the point is, you've catalogued the Atlas novel, which is indeed quite large, as if it's nothing remarkable worth earmarking in relation to the rest of the other tomes in your pile. Clearly impartial to it, I see, other than the fact that it's a big book. Ooh, but no different than one among many of a collection of stylish shirts, let's say, that you might have hanging in your extensive Hollywood-style wardrobe or something. Yes, it exposes you for the bigger fraud than I already knew you were. I'll give you a hint. The work of Ayn Rand is the one thing that can save mankind at this point, not your dizzying pablum. But what that actually means is a serious constructive look at the work of Ayn Rand, not the ignorant and skewed viewpoints that are the most predominant, or the dizzying pablum that you would likely transform it into, with a lot of that skewing and ignorance being of the intentional kind that I've previously discussed. Largely because the parasites, manipulators, and weasels of the world don't want the work of Ayn Rand to be understood properly. And the other thing is, I know that many people drop her books like a hot corn cob once they start to discover that they tend to fit the character traits of the scoundrels and moral cowards of the story. But goodness me, now I see people waving it around and making bizarre remarks about connections with Christ, and then picking up a Jordan Peterson book as if it carries more weight. No wonder you think Friedrich Nietzsche was the smartest philosopher that ever lived. He wasn't, by the way, and not only that, he didn't even come close to the brilliance of Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand used Aristotle's A is A as the footing and filled in the rest of the pieces of the puzzle. Whereas most philosophers, especially the likes of, say, Immanuel Kant, preferred their words to be tangled just enough to keep their audience just a little bit confused, and therein creating an inexhaustible need for their audience to seek them out for explanations of all things natural or human. Fraudsters in the end, just like Peterson and Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil is a monster. Dr. Phil doesn't waste any time confusing people. He writes a book called There Is No Reality, Only Perception. And within it, he speaks about the importance of your connection with the invisible man in the sky, accompanied with self-help rating tests from 1 to 10, and one of them is a prayer rating. So how does one know when they're really praying enough to achieve that rating of 10? They can't, can they? That's the whole idea. No easier way to instill self-doubt and guarantee return customers to the old psychologist's couch. Wipe out reality first, then tell them to pray and rate said prayers. Anyone that calls himself a psychologist and isn't challenging all this invisible man in the sky rubbish is doing more damage than good and is a monster. That's why I hate men like Peterson. Psychologist. Yeah, right. Whereas on the other hand, Ayn Rand didn't want her audience to be confused. She wanted them to be philosophically armed with the proper tactics to parry those who spread philosophical poison. But I shouldn't have to be clashing swords with people like this, and I don't take any great pleasure in it, but we're in deep trouble as a society, both from an intellectual and monetary standpoint, with the latter being a direct consequence of the former. And if you're going to wave books around without a thorough understanding of what you're talking about, it's not going to sail past me like a flowery breeze on laundry day. I can't ignore a faulty spokesman concerning such serious issues, and you're the one that started waving that book around, man, and it's not a cookbook. Furthermore, if people do want to learn the philosophy of Ayn Rand, they should be reading her little handbooks first, particularly Philosophy Who Needs It, The Virtue of Selfishness, and For the New Intellectual. It's better to have the non-fiction philosophical framework understood first, then plunge into it applied to her fictional stories. I'm actually growing quite weary of hearing people mentioning they've read Atlas just because it's a big book. Please don't wave that book around while mentioning the word philosophy, then make an obscure connection to Christ in relation to that book, and then draw people's attention to a book of 12 Steps to Confusion, and then raise books about faith, with said books of faith appearing to be the winner when the game of musical chairs is finished. That would indicate that you're pretty much fucking lost, and would also explain why you're one of these guys that thinks there's a moderate version of Islam that can be wedged into the equation of our society here. There isn't, and it can't, so please stop pretending that it can. And if you're going to continue to say that it can, then please don't say you're trying to save Canada with your academic presentations. And certainly don't wave Atlas Shrugged around as a show of ordnance. Fuck's sakes, leave Atlas Shrugged out of it if you're going to mangle everything, thank you very much. I'm convinced at this point that most of the so-called YouTube heroes out there don't even want all the chaos to be subdued, because then what would they do if they weren't cashing in on YouTube? Cashing in on YouTube while complaining about all the chaos and claiming to have all the answers but without any real ones. It seems more like a competition of who has the coolest sunglasses or the most books for show and tell or the fanciest microphone to bitch to the world through with no understanding as to why society is running amok in the first place. Many years ago, when I had that John Galt t-shirt made, I wore it to a couple of Rush concerts at the tail end of the band's career and was quite surprised that not one single person passed a comment about it at either concert. It really showed me the level of ignorance among the general population. I'll be linking things with the band Rush from time to time as I go along. Canadian music to me means the band Rush, not Justin Bieber. I can't help but notice seeing these punks on construction sites these days that can't even walk around the job site properly because they're too busy pulling up their Justin Bieber-style pants or worrying about whether they've got any text messages they might need to attend to. The mental agony is so fucking painful watching this two-faced book generation of smartphone droids wandering around in a coma, making a spectacle of themselves and humanity. So, many years later now, and looking at the dreadful situation we're in today, I realized that I really should have had that damn t-shirt made to read, "Who is Howard Rourke?" Because that's the hero that's been missing in the world, and that's the hero that nobody talks about when the name Ayn Rand does come up. It's always John Galt in Atlas Shrugged. But Howard Rourke is Ayn Rand's literary symbol of the individual, not John Galt. John Galt still has the same merits, mind you, but Atlas Shrugged is centralized on the societal aspect of things in the sense of what would happen if all the great minds went on strike. The book was originally intended to be titled The Strike. She eventually changed it to Atlas Shrugged to mimic the sense of what would happen to society and the world if all the giant Atlas-like minds just shrugged and said, "Oh well, my mind is no longer available for the parasites to feed off," and disappeared from society. That is the main theme of the book. The war of the collective versus the individual is depicted in The Fountainhead. And another vital point that needs to be driven home here that is so often missed is that Ayn Rand's idea of a heroic man was the thinking man, the productive man, a man that's always trying to improve his work and doesn't let any other men exploit it. She admired the men that moved humanity forward with their vision, not manipulative men that restrained and suppressed humanity with sacrificial fables of gloom and doom and original sins. I notice you neglected to mention that intrinsic point. One of the things that Ayn Rand found particularly disgusting was the Apollo astronauts reading and transmitting passages from the Bible in the space capsule while orbiting Earth. She hated it because she knew, and to paraphrase her, that no amount of praying or chanting or stamping your feet will put a spacecraft into spatial orbit. Just like NASA can't do it with a team of men where the strongest argument in the room is,
"Everyone's entitled to their own opinion."
Ayn Rand was born in Russia, with her real name being Elisa Rosenbaum, and she knew quite well the difference between a society that suppresses the mind and a society that allows the mind to think freely and flourish. A flourishing mind is what built the West, and she knew quite well that's what built the West. But do we see that kind of man depicted in the theaters today or profiled as the man to emulate? Nope, not even remotely. In fact, people hate talking about things like work ethic because it's all TGIF and ass-kissing, Jim Jock, guns a-blazing kind of hero. Just look at all the slop that oozes out of Hollywood today. Nobody even knows how to write a fucking screenplay anymore. It's so denigrated, and most of it is now regurgitated comic book hero stuff saving the world from the villains. The problem is, they're the villains the world needs to be saved from. It's so revolting. That's why we see the whole entertainment industry still desperately trying to help Andrew McCabe tear down Trump, so they're not exposed for the real filth that they are. Now, Trump is far from being a Howard Rourke in the genuine sense, but I do find it interesting that, like me, his favorite book is The Fountainhead. And there's an ironic connection, such that Ayn Rand intentionally gave the Rourke character distinctively orange hair so that it gave the mob something else to hate him for. Not unlike how people are jeering at Trump as the
Orange blah blah blah.
For me, The Fountainhead has always been my favorite book out of the pair because I can identify with the character of Rourke so personally in the sense that much of his life was a turbulent wreck as a result of holding his work ethic as his cardinal value. The Fountainhead is vital as the precursor to Atlas Shrugged because it deals with the nature of man on an individual basis. From a philosophical standpoint, which is the crux of it all, you can't have the second book without the first, and if you don't appreciate the significance of The Fountainhead, then Atlas Shrugged is going to mean bugger all. So again, it does more harm than good to suggest the second book without laying a footing for the first, especially if you're going to make a hokey deliberation about Christ. Moreover, I don't even need to know if you've read The Fountainhead, simply based on the lack of significance you hold with Atlas. And if you have read The Fountainhead, it's clear you didn't understand it, based on the same reason I just noted. This isn't a game we're playing here, but you people are playing popularity contests, while pretending to be tutors of the universe. I get so annoyed when people use the word philosophy to sound esteemed, but really regard it more like it's a Dairy Queen treat that's just nice to have now and again. Here, consume a little of this and a little of that, and enjoy your brain freeze. But if one does take the word philosophy seriously, like I do, people cackle with mockery and think you're a necromancer sitting in front of a crystal ball. Then they'll go to the theaters and get deeply spellbound while watching Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And incidentally, I should add here quickly that I don't care how much the Ayn Rand Institute speaks favorably about Harry Potter, because in my judgment, the participants of the Ayn Rand Institute lost their marbles a long time ago. But I must say, you people just bewilder me in how you think knowledge just means absorbing and regurgitating gazillions of different viewpoints without any thorough examination of any of it. But I sure do know why Atlas Shrugged is always the more popular book that's touted in the public domain. It's touted because it encourages the idea of being wealthy and rich, and droves of people love to gobble that idea up. The problem is, it's commonly the only idea they gobble up. There's certainly nothing wrong with wanting to be wealthy if the desire to do quality, honest work is the intended means, but when the message is simply bottled and labeled as being rich is great, then it's duly out of line and transforms Ayn Rand's entire life's work into some fly-infested carcass of rot. The movie they made of Atlas Shrugged was absolutely vile. It just defecated all over the image of Ayn Rand. Besides, seeing a director of the movie Atlas Shrugged smiling away wearing a Nike cap on set behind the scenes is pretty sick. Nike is not an example of capitalism. None of what's happening in the world today is a representation of true capitalism, but capitalism sure is getting blamed for it all. Nike exploits people, and that's precisely the polar opposite of the principles that Ayn Rand devoted her life to teaching people in the capitalism she tried to save through her writing. But she pretty much went to her grave miserable because nobody listened to her, and the ones that did praise her work and said she was right had no intention of actually acting on the principles, because that would require some risk to one's own financial standing and general popularity. And that's all that matters to people. That's why it should be, who is Howard Rourke? Because otherwise it's, look at me, don't I look successful? Look at me with my latest toys and smartphone. People like Paul Ryan, that claim to be big fans of Ayn Rand, are the ones that disgrace her name the most. They've turned it all into a horror theater show. And Ayn Rand just loved the theater.
Do you think we delivered enough sorties in the theater of operations, sir?
I certainly hope so.
Do you think they got the picture, sir?
Yes. We can't be taking any chances, you know. We don't want anybody...
Jumping Jupiter, did you hear that? Captain, the detectors are showing a sudden multiple flat contusion coming in fast from behind. Goodness me, look at this mess. They must have fragmented a space rock.
It's a diversion while trying to take us out. Turn the ship around and we'll deal with them.
But Captain, we'll be heading straight into this mess.
Don't worry, Lieutenant. Just stay calm. It's just another traitor lurking, causing trouble. Just watch, you'll see him bugger off soon enough once he sees we're not fucking around. See, there he goes.
Yikes, look at him go, sir. He's gone ultrasonic now, sir.
Punch it, Lieutenant.
Yes, sir.
Take him out the second he's in range. Yes, high intensity infrared heat seekers dispatch from hotel report starboard wing.
Yes, sir. Nailed him.
Good work, Lieutenant.
Thank you, sir. That was fucking spectacular, sir. Do you think they got the message now, sir?
I suspect as much. Let's take it home, Lieutenant. Job well done.
Roger that, sir.